welcome everybody to the edition of the community office hours. This is going to be a joint November and December combined video because, well, we'll be off at the end of December and you all should
Yay.
be taking time to yourself as well. Anyways, I'm your host, Heather, joined with my host, Monica, my co-host.
Hello.
And we brought Brendan and Eleanor to talk to you about Exchange. So Brendan has been the lead on the project, but I believe that baton has been passed to Eleanor since she's been a rock star. And Eleanor, do you want to take it away and just kind of introduce yourself briefly? What's your background? And then we can do the same for Brendan.
Sure. So I'm Eleanor DeSherry. I'm a backend engineer here at MCLA. I actually only started here about 6 months ago, so I came in kind of at the end of the Exchange journey, but plenty of time since then. And so I came from I've have a career in kind of like scientific computing, and then wanted to move into the open source world. So I'm here and working on Thunderbird.
And you hit the ground running. Man, it was great. So I'm really glad you got hired. Brendan, who are you and what do you do?
Hello, I'm Brendan. I've been working at MZLA for a bit over 2 years now. I've been also leading the exchange work co-leading it from the start effectively, and then kind of pushing through most of this year to get it somewhere usable by our wonderful users, and it's out now. So that's kind of job well done. I'm still obviously working on and around the exchange stuff and all the Rust stuff, which you I think we did an office hour on this, and I was also um, involved in there. Um, my memory works great. So
You've actually done two.
have
Yeah.
I?
Yeah,
Okay.
two.
Was
Yeah.
it just two
And
Okay.
or was it three? I don't actually know.
Oh, sorry. You mean the rest office hours? I was
Yeah.
thinking community office hours. Yeah, no,
Oh,
I
also,
have
yeah.
also hosted rest office hours for the team and the community, and and yeah, still obviously still involved in and around Exchange on Thunderbirds. But as you mentioned, the baton has been passed recently to Eleanor, who's been doing amazing work. Like the amount of stuff that she's been doing in just about 6 months is incredible. So yeah.
yeah, seriously, I forget you've only been with the team for a half year. I'm like, no, you've been here for longer. It's like, no, no, you haven't. Oh my gosh. Because it was just like you jumped into the Thunderbird, like deep end of the pool for exchange. It's like, hi, welcome. Here's all this stuff.
Uh-huh. And you've done it so pleasantly. I'm like,
Mhm.
good job. Um, yeah. So, well, I think that thanks for the introductions, you two. I think Brendan, you mentioned Exchange. So we'll start off with the first question. What is Microsoft Exchange? Either one of you can take it.
Do you want to take it, Eleanor, or should I?
You go ahead. So you've got, I mean, go ahead. It's fine.
All right. So Microsoft Exchange is the name of the backend platform for a number of productivity tools by Microsoft. The short description is if you've ever used Outlook for in your in your workplace, in your school, university, whatever, you have used Exchange because that's the backend that's kind of powering that. Um, so so yeah, Exchange kind of refers to that whole platform, which includes email, includes calendar, includes address book. I think a couple other features, but like those three are the kind of main ones and also the one that intersects with Thunderbird the most.
It's kind of like a suite, right?
Yeah.
Yup.
Very cool. Thanks.
And so, why, and this is absolutely not a dig at you all or anyone else who's been involved with Thunderbird for the past 20, oh my gosh, 21 years. Thunderbird is old enough to go to Vegas and have itself a time. But why has it taken so long to get to this point? And this is kind of a chance to talk about how we haven't added a new protocol in the 20 plus years since we've been started. And we have a somewhat older code base, and we have a lot of challenges. And so, Brendan, as someone who's kind of been with this project from the start, maybe you can start. But Eleanor, we'd really love to hear what your kind of experience of those challenges has been.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, this is, the first like this is an old code base. This is also the first time we're adding a new protocol to Thunderbird in quite a long time. In fact, the before that, the latest protocol to be added to Thunderbird was IMAP, and that was before the 1.0, so over 20 years ago. Um, there was there was a so one aspect of this was not a lot of people still remembered how all of that architecture worked. There had still been maintenance on all this code, but knowing a code enough to maintain it isn't necessarily the same as knowing a code well enough to be able to improve on it, to iterate on it, to add new stuff to it. So a challenge was essentially to reappropriate that part of our code base to build an understanding, to build a knowledge of how everything fits together. Um, it's most of the kind of items that I remember working on when we were kind of in the phase of the project where we were iterating on just features like adding the EWS support for the EWS operations for one specific Thunderbird feature and all quick parenthesis the EWS refers to a specific API that we use to talk to Exchange servers. When, like, for each operation, for each exchange operation, each Thunderbird feature, there was at least about the same time spent implementing it as there was doing research beforehand to figure out how this whole thing fits into Thunderbird, how the interface talks to the lower level components, how everything is expected to be formatted, to be communicated, and and another challenge was also we didn't necessarily want to just replicate what had been done for IMAP or POP3 or NNTP or all the other protocols that we had. We also wanted to try to define what it meant to build another protocol for Thunderbird in the current era, in the modern era. Um, that involved the introduction of Rust in the code base, which we've talked about in the past. That also introduced some new architecture elements, some new components, some new code infrastructure that we didn't have. Some, I want to say, about a quarter of the time spent on this project so far has been spent building code infrastructure so we can easily plug into the internal Thunderbird components to perform asynchronous operations, to perform network traffic, to perform authentication, because obviously all the interactions with servers are authenticated, and building those components in a way that is modern, that is reusable as well. That's probably something we're going to talk more towards the end of this episode, but something that we'll want to be able to reuse if possible, just wholesale as they are for other protocols that we might want to add in the past. So essentially like thinking, designing, implementing those code infrastructure components was also one of the challenges and that we had to face, and that explained why it took so long to add this feature.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I can
Elena, if you
imagine
want
that
to.
like building like modularized modern code to plug into old legacy spaghetti code is a little different and challenging. Eleanor, I'm really curious to hear what your challenges
Mhm.
encountered were.
Well, I mean, before I get into that, I kind of just want to emphasize how much that upfront research paid off, especially somebody
Oh
coming
yeah.
in later in the project, from my perspective. Because, by the time I got here, a lot of that research had been done, the architecture had been set up, the Rust C++ split was there, kind of the separation between local operations and remote operations was all there. And so for me to come in with that, just was amazing for getting started on it. And so I mean, I feel like I got very lucky in not having very many challenges working on this, but I think that's largely a credit to the work that Brendan and other folks did on this, coming in. But I mean, I can definitely see like, having, looking at other areas of the code base. I mean, I've mostly been focused on EWS, since I've been working on the Thunderbird code base. But I can definitely see where a lot of those challenges would have been, by looking, because I'm also, doing maintenance work on the IMAP implementation and on a lot of our local storage implementations and things like that. And to come in to kind of that and then see kind of this modular, approach that could be taken for a new protocol, I think was extremely forward thinking, and just and really paid off. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, I think, but it's, going to pay off in the future. Um, I feel like, the challenges for me coming in is, for a lot of the pieces that I implemented, um, a lot of the everything to deal with EWS was just very smooth, right? Because we had that very clean separation into, Rust of how we talk to EWS, and we get to use all of the great, tools that we have in Rust for things like serialization and that's great. So, but a lot of the challenge for at least the pieces that I've worked on is, we do sitting in the IMAP implementation and in the POP3 implementation, we have a lot of pieces of code that we need in order to work with, the local data stores. So how we hold, the messages, locally, in order to sync them up with the remote side of things. And so the challenge there is, how can we, pull a lot of that code in, reuse it, so that we can, keep using stuff that we know works for managing the local data store with IMAP and the other protocols, but also have it be used in this new, modular infrastructure for implementing protocols that we built for EWS. And so I think a lot of the time, at least that I've spent on it, has been how do we, take that C++ code and refactor it, so that we can use it in this new modular architecture and keep the, existing IMAP implementation working and stable. So I think that's probably the largest challenge that I ran into.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, good job, Brendan, writing great documentation and laying out good architecture. So
Yay. We are big fans of good documentation here.
yeah. Um, so I know we've talked about like EWS, which is the Exchange Web Services API, and how, we mentioned briefly at the beginning, like it's been released. Um, I think we forgot, we're all so like embedded in this uh, world that we forgot to mention that in Thunderbird version 145, actually before that, but we really want to push it from Thunderbird 145. People can use Exchange Mail natively
Mhm.
in Thunderbird, and so that's what these wonderful people have implemented. Um, so kind of looking at that, we said it's a suite of things, but only mail is supported right now. If we kind of switch gears and talk about how that looks and how that works. talking about the account setup. Can one of you tell us a little bit about kind of the expected flow when someone goes to add their Exchange mail account in Thunderbird?
Yeah, I can take that. So the expected flow in I think most cases, hopefully, is you enter your email address, your work email address, your school email address into Thunderbird. The Thunderbird will, as is usual, run a bunch of configuration lookups. It's going to check configurations against your mail service provider's infrastructure against the Thunderbird's ISP database. It's going to try to guess some server names, so on and so forth. If in most cases, hopefully, it should be able to detect when Exchange, when EWS is available for an Exchange account. When that is possible in the options that are offered to the user, it will offer one that's called Exchange on. So that's Exchange on the new and shiny account hub on the kind of older legacy account setup flow. It's still called Exchange Web Services, and selecting this option and then continuing should automatically just set up your account, and it should be working out of the box. It set up the account. It does a first synchronization to get the list of folders, the list of messages. So in most cases, it should work out of the box, but obviously there are some um, configuration variation, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about as well.
And I just want to add that we have a support article that kind of has some screenshots to help out visually with what Brendan just described that we'll link to in the blog post.
And I and I
Definitely,
also want
definitely.
and I also wanted to just to also add on to that, to say that in so not in the legacy account setup, but in the account hub, so the new and shiny account setup interface, there's also manual config possible for AWS. So if you know the AWS API endpoint and your username and authentication, you can also just set up something manually from there.
Nice. So one of the things that you mentioned in there were the different server configuration options. So can you tell us a bit more, either Eleanor or Brendan, about what configuration options are supported right now?
I guess I can go ahead and take that one to start with, but feel free to add anything that I missed, Brendan. So, I mean, like Brendan said, a lot of the configuration flow is streamlined and auto-detected.
Mhm.
Um, and so, I mean, at least with as things are right now, you can customize your API endpoint, but that should like the Exchange endpoint. But that should all be set in terms of kind of once you've got your email account all up and running. We've brought a number of the things that you can configure with an IMAP account over to Exchange in Thunderbird. So things like when you connect to your Exchange account, it has its folders like if you go into their web interface or something like that, where they mark your trash folder and your spam folder and all that kind of stuff. And so we have the ability to customize those folders the same way you can customize those folders on the IMAP side. So if you want to use a different trash folder or you want to use a different spam folder, you can change that configuration. One thing to note is that is because there's no real way to like mark that on the server, so that's just going to be a configuration that works from Thunderbird. It's not going to change like if you were to use both Thunderbird and the web interface, it's not going to change what the web interface thinks the trash folder is. There's just no way to do that with the Exchange protocol. So I mean, that being said, those configuration options, as long as you're kind of living in Thunderbird and doing that, it should just work seamlessly. But you might see the difference there if you're moving back and forth between the web interface or another client and Thunderbird. I think that's the main thing that can be kind of configured and customized with respect to mail at the moment. Can you think of anything else that I'm missing, Brendan?
Um, I think yeah, I think you're right. That's kind of the main thing. The another kind of point of configuration, I think, with the server and more on the kind of on the account setup part of the flow is authentication, which we currently have kind of an ongoing project to make authentication for AWS as complete as possible. In most cases, your server will, sorry, your account will be hosted somewhere on Microsoft's infrastructure on in the I think they call it Microsoft 365 now suite. The that has kind of a standard central OAuth authentication portal. In some cases, your organization might require you to use custom credentials to authenticate against the Microsoft OAuth portal. We don't support that yet, but we're working on it actively. There's some experiments in Thunderbird that we're currently testing with users who have very nicely signed up to help us test some less usual configs. We also have support, obviously, for on-premise servers not using OAuth. That's also something that we'll want to support at some point, but we still need to pin down exactly how we'll be supporting that. But password authentication is at least partly implemented using what's called basic oath. And we're also actively working on supporting another password authentication mechanism called NTLM, which tends to be a bit more secure. We already have code for that has landed in Thunderbird 146, but it's still very hidden because we're not happy with the user experience yet. So still kind of working on improving that.
And real quick, you said on-premise server. What did you mean by that? Can you just
So when we talk about on-premise server, we talk about hosting the Exchange server software yourself on your company's premises, so either on the physical premises or in the company's internal infrastructure, rather than relying on a SaaS platform like Microsoft 365.
gotcha? That makes sense. Um, cool. What can a user go through a manual configuration flow? I know that's always been like an option for IMAP. So what about Exchange? What's supported there?
Yeah, I can I can take this. I mean, we do support some manual configuration for Exchange, mostly specifying things like the AWS API endpoint, the authentication within what we currently support. Um, it's something we'll be expanding as we support more server configurations for Exchange, but right now it's there only, as I mentioned in the newer account hub. The older legacy account setup flow hasn't been updated to support manual config for AWS yet.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
All right.
And
Okay.
I was just going to jump in on that one. So the other thing is, um, the manual config, I think, is probably going to be more useful for users who are using either an on-premises Exchange instance, or in some cases, users who have whose administrators have added some restrictions to their cloud-hosted instances. And so again, going back, we have work in progress right now to help set up it's mostly going to be with the authentication configuration. So I mean, we are actually actively looking for people to try out people who because we don't have access to like a non-office. We have an on-premises instance that we have access to, and we have our Office 365 instance. And but users who have those kind of additional restrictions, if they're interested in helping us test a lot of these new authentication options that Brendan talked about, and they're comfortable using the development versions of the software, definitely reach out to us on those channels because we can't possibly test we don't have access to test all of the possible configurations that there are for Exchange servers. So the more users we can get to exercise those capabilities, a lot of these additional options, they're hidden behind preferences right now because we're not comfortable with them. They're experimental, but the more users that we can get to try those who are comfortable trying the experimental features, the sooner we can get them out.
That's a good point. There's like a whole matrix here of different scenarios that could be tested, right? And we only have
Yeah.
access to a couple of them. There's lots of different authentication options and hosting options and like domain redirects. And so, yeah, if you feel like your situation might be outside the norm, then please reach out to Brendan and Eleanor. They would love to have you help us test. Thank you. Well, I
Yeah.
would love that too. We all would.
Mhm. Everyone would. Just the
Everyone.
more testing we have, or even if you think it's an super exceptional situation, you don't know how many users Thunderbird has. Chances are you're not the only one who has that, and it helps everyone out.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Well, and we'll make sure to let people know where to get in touch if they want to help with that or any other element of testing. I think we've done a pretty good job kind of covering what's going to happen when you sign in to an Exchange account for email. So now let's kind of focus a bit more on kind of what is email going to do once you sign in. So this first question is for Brendan. We want to know what is supported with attachments.
I believe all the attachment related features in Thunderbird should be supported for AWS. The one of the things that we were pleasantly surprised to discover with AWS is that it supports, despite being a custom API, it supports some kind of open standard formats. Including standard internet format message through RFC 822, things like that. And so all the things around around downloading sorry. So all the things around downloading attachments, displaying inline attachments, displaying special attachments like you can open PDF attachments directly into Thunderbird. That should be supported. There was also some extra work that was needed to support specifically detaching and deleting attachments, and that's also done and shipped. So all the if you find an attachment feature that doesn't work, please file a bug,
Mm,
essentially.
yeah.
Nice. It's great to know that all the attachment things work.
Right.
Or should work. Yeah. Um, what about message storage? Eleanor, I believe you've worked a lot with like kind of storage database, what we're doing there. And so maybe how are all of the messages stored locally? Are they all downloaded? So when a user attaches their or creates their Exchange account and they have a million messages, does it download all of them? Like how does that work? How is it different from IMAP?
So yeah, I mean, so how it works right now is when we connect to the account originally, it works a whole lot like the way IMAP works. So, right, messages are broken into kind of two pieces, right? There's the headers of the message, that's things like the sender when it was sent, what the reply to address is, all that kind of stuff. The subject line is also those. And then there's the body of the message, which includes the text content of the message or, any of the attachments that are on the message, or digital signatures and things like that. And so the way that it works is it connects and it goes through kind of the folders in order and pulls down all of the headers for the messages. So and those are very small. They can be downloaded quickly. So if you have a lot of messages, those are going to come. And then, there's a longer running process that runs in the background that actually starts downloading the message content. Where we're different right now than IMAP is with IMAP, we have folder subscriptions. So that you can say that you don't want to automatically pull down the headers or the message bodies in certain folders, right? Because maybe that's your archive folder, so you don't really care. And so, but that's something that we're working on in our current development phase also is to add those folder subscriptions so that there's more fine-grained control over what you end up pulling down. So I think that's the biggest difference right now. So yes, it will pull down kind of originally all of that, all of those headers and the metadata about those messages, but that should be relatively quick. And the account is usable when it's actually pulling the heavier data from the bodies.
Nice. Is
And
that going to change like once we do eventually move to this like global database model? Like, will that help with like the folder subscriptions or?
I think that's still to be determined
Okay,
because a
yeah.
lot of the GMDB global message database GMDB is what we call it. The kind of parameters for how that's going to operate are still kind of in flight. But what I
Hmm.
will say, one of the goals of that work is also to try to make it easier to, share these features like folder subscription across protocols, so we don't have to re-implement every time for every protocol. So,
Right. Good call. Thanks.
That sounds like an extremely effective way to work. So
I'll
this is
also just add something really quickly. Although we don't currently support subscriptions, I believe the options in the folder in the properties of a folder to deselect it from offline storage essentially should work. It still means that the metadata, the headers, are going to be downloaded and stored, but it offers better control of how many of how the message contents are downloaded and stored.
Great.
nice. So I think our next question I think we may almost started to get into it in the previous section. As Eleanor, when you were talking about the difference between doing things in the web view and then doing them in the Thunderbird. So if a file or a folder gets moved in the web view, will that automatically sync in the Thunderbird or not?
And vice
yeah,
versa.
yeah, those are supposed to remain in sync. So when we put a
Okay.
lot of work into making sure they do. So if they don't, then file a
Yay.
bug. But
Okay.
yeah, no, there's those are the only thing I was talking about earlier was the actual like configuration for saying like what happens
Okay.
when I delete a message. But in
Got it.
terms of moving messages, moving folders, yeah, they should everything should sync.
Perfectly.
When it happens. So if you do split your time between the web interface or another client like Outlook and Thunderbird, then whatever you do on the other client should be reflected in Thunderbird. And if you move
Perfect.
messages around in Thunderbird or move folders or rename folders, all that should flow all the way back. So everybody should be in sync across all of your clients.
Excellent.
And
And
the only kind of limitation to this is the synchronization between the WebView and Thunderbird. If you have them open at the same time, might not be immediate in Thunderbird. The reason for that is because we only synchronize with the server every so often at kind of periodic intervals. I think the default is about 10 minutes, something like that. Um, and um, and so Thunderbird will sync at startup and will then sync periodically. But it does mean that if you make a change in the web view, it might take a few minutes before it's replicated on Thunderbird. If you want to sync your changes immediately, you can always use the kind of manual, check new messages button in Thunderbird that triggers either a full sync for the folder that you're in, or if you're selecting the account, it should try to sync all the folders at once.
I was just going to ask that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, Kind of going back to some folder operations. I know that like normal folder operations, create, delete, rename, move, those are all supported. Are there any folder operations that are not supported? Besides
I
like,
think
where
the
you automatically send messages when you delete them, that kind of thing.
yeah, I think the main uh, the main gap in all folder operation support is probably around sharing. The EWS API doesn't have a great coverage of all the folder sharing features that you can find in Outlook. So it's difficult for us to replicate them in Thunderbird, obviously, if we don't have an API to use for this. I don't know if you want to add to this.
No, I think that's the only one that I'm aware of is the shared folders. And yeah, but I think everything else is it's supported. So if it doesn't, again, file a bug.
Great.
Mhm. But I know one of the things that users in Thunderbird really love because it's incredibly handy are filters. And so yes, will people be able to use filters for their Exchange accounts?
So, so filters should mostly work. There are some limitations. For example, if you try filtering on a kind of non-standard header, it might like the filters might not work for your AWS accounts. When we synchronize the metadata for a message, we synchronize only a limited set of metadata. So if the email header that you're filtering on is not in that small set, then the filter will just never hit and never be applied. Um, We've had some limitations in the past around message bodies, but I believe with the current the latest changes around message downloads, it might not be sorry, Elena, do you want to?
Yeah, that one's still not at 145. That's coming either 146 or 147. So you still can't filter based on message body because we're still working on that one, but that's in very active development at the moment.
Okay.
That's something that we're targeting. So that's coming, but it's not quite there yet, and it's again because of that the split between the headers and the body. We just have to handle them differently.
Gotcha.
Um, I guess the other thing that I wanted to mention for filters, the other kind of limitation that we have right now is filters and notifications interact with one another. So if you've got a filter set up that takes, a message, an incoming message, and throws it into a folder that you've got notifications disabled for because you don't really need to know that about messages in that folder, currently, you will still get a notification about that email, and that just so with IMAP you wouldn't, but with EWS that's still something we're working on. It's in our current development phase, but that's the other difference to be aware of is even the filter gets applied, but notifications haven't been worked out so that you won't get notified if it's something that you didn't want to get that the filter
Okay.
figures out it's something you didn't want to get notified.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Um, I guess it would be better to be notified unnecessarily than to not be notified, right? When you were expecting. Um, okay, cool. Well, in Thunderbird, I think we all, well, in any email, really, we all rely on search quite heavily because we got so many emails.
Mhm.
Um, and I know that, search in Thunderbird in general can be improved, but for Exchange specifically, how well would you say search works? About
I
the same?
believe I believe search should work about the same. We've had to fix a few things here and there to make the different kind of search work, but for all the essentially just like with other protocols, for all the data that you have downloaded, um, all of it should be searchable using the Thunderbird, either the quick filters or the message search or the advanced search as well. And I'm specifying for all the data you have downloaded, because obviously if you don't have the message body for a specific message downloaded, you won't be able to search for it because Thunderbird only does local search at the moment.
So don't add your Exchange count, and while it's downloading everything, immediately start searching for
Yeah.
specific things in
Well, I
message
mean,
buttons.
you might be lucky and get a
Right.
hit in the first few messages that it has just downloaded, but it wouldn't necessarily be a full search.
Gotcha. Okay.
Awesome. So hopefully after watching this video, we've got an downloading 145 or being updated to 145 that will have a lot of people in the community wanting to provide feedback and maybe wanting to help test. How can the community best do those things?
I think the best way to engage with the team is through we have most of our public communication channels on Matrix. So there's I believe that they're all listed on the Thunderbird website. There's one for community and one for development. If you want to specifically report a bug or ask for feature to be supported or something like that, Bugzilla is also a very good place to go. That's where we do most of our tracking for all the development that needs to happen. Um, so finding a bug on Bugzilla is usually the best place to let us know about something that doesn't work as it should. And obviously, the closest someone is to the actual development cycle, the most helpful it is because it means that we can get feedback more quickly and we can have a more accurate idea of whether an issue might be impacted in a good or bad way by some recent changes that have happened. So running beta or daily would also help. Obviously, we also more than happy to help and engage if you're using release because you want to ensure things break the least possible. But yeah, Elena, do you want to add anything to this?
I was just going to say on Bugzilla, we also have a dedicated component under the Mail News Core product for Exchange. So it's
Yeah.
if you put a bug in the Mail News Core product and the networking Exchange component, we'll see it faster because it won't have to go, through triage with all the other bugs about all the other things that we get. So.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, good point. Um, you guys have done a lot of work on this, obviously, and it's great to see kind of looking ahead at our other platforms, Android and iOS, how much of this work will help Exchange be brought to those platforms, whether it's, you know, code leverage or just learnings from like using the Exchange API. How much of this
Yeah.
this?
So although we have built Rust components that can be reused outside of the Thunderbird desktop code base, they're not straightforward to reuse in mobile applications, mostly for the same reason why Rust components are usually not always easy to reuse in mobile applications in general. I've chatted with the mobile team about that a few months ago, and most of the concerns were around not wanting to increase the size of the APK too much because that gets into into more issues with packaging releasing. And but although we might not be reusing those components directly in Thunderbird for Android or Thunderbird for iOS, we have definitely built some familiarity and some understanding of how those APIs work. And so, as you know, team and as an organization, we have that kind of base of knowledge that if not um, if not, you know, documented on text entirely yet, it's still understood and can be communicated. So will definitely that will definitely help, hopefully, uh, accelerate some of that work.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but that might not always be like obvious to just the
Mhm.
Oh
general
yeah.
user. Yeah.
So I think that this next question is a bit similar. How much of the code that has been written for AWS can be reused for Graph, which is what Microsoft is moving to?
Um, I can go ahead and take this one because
Okay.
this is like something I'm very excited about. So,
Ooh.
but and again, this is a credit to I think like all of that upfront work that Brendan and everyone did in the lead up to this is and you know we're hopeful that you know that basically everything that's not just directly interacting with EWS can be reused for Graph API. So EWS is the older API, and it works differently than Graph. Graph is their new API that they have for manipulating mailboxes and you know mail messages and all that data. And the way that the code is architected is the structure of the code is that we have kind of all the code that manipulates the local part of Thunderbird. So keeping your folders in sync locally and keeping your messages in sync locally. And then that's all implemented in C++ in Thunderbird. And then we have all of kind of the protocol specific code for EWS, which is all implemented in Rust. And that's just the code that does all of the remote operations, so making sure that your folders and your messages are in the right place on the server. And between them, there's just a very simple interface that's just kind of like, you know, the things that you want to do to a mail store. So things like move a folder, move a message, rename a folder, right? All of those things are kind of those fundamental operations. And there's a very clean separation, which is something that Thunderbird doesn't really have for its other protocols. There's a very clean separation between managing the local store and managing the remote store. Um,
Mm.
so what we're trying to do with Graph, and we've already started doing this, we're putting some of the fundamental building blocks of that in place right now, is just, you know, kind of just plug in a different implementation behind that very simple, you know, list of things that you should be able to do with the server, you know. Um, and so hopefully, you know, we can reuse all of the authentication stuff. And we're actually already seeing that with some of those, because those are the first building blocks that we're working on is how do we authenticate to Graph? We're basically able to reuse everything that we built for EWS in order to do that. And so we're hopeful that, you know, because the operations between EWS and Graph are so similar, we'll be able to, you know, keep almost all of the local code exactly the same and then just plug in, you know, basically speak a different language behind the scenes whenever you're talking to the server side. And like I said, we're getting started on that and it's going well so far. And so hopefully we can kind of continue with that. So the hope is most of it is sorry, that was a long answer, but it's something, it's again, it's a credit to, I think, a lot of that upfront work that
Mhm.
everybody put in for this.
Yeah, I can tell that it must be very cathartic to see that efficiency and just feel like, oh, this feels good to be able to reuse all of this. So kind of, you know, same thing in the next question. I assume the answer is going to be similar, but like how much of this code can we use for JMAP? Because we've heard people ask for that at FOSDEM and such. Um,
Yeah, I mean the answer for JMAP I think isn't as um, well known or understood, at least by us, than it is for Graph, because as Ellen mentioned, Graph and AWS have very similar concepts, very similar ways of handling some operations. It's not entirely clear how that maps with Graph, but what we know about Graph is that it's another protocol that is based on top of HTTP. That is another protocol that uses kind of standard authentication methods. And we have built a lot of code infrastructure, as I mentioned at the start, to be able to easily run asynchronous operations in Rust using Thunderbird's internal components, internal kind of threading and concurrency components. We have built some code infrastructure to easily generate HTTP traffic using Thunderbird's network stack, which is actually Firefox's network stack that we're kind of inheriting. And we've also built, as Elena mentioned, a lot of code infrastructure around authentication, also using some of Firefox's and Thunderbird's internal components in in a way that can be used very easily and without having to re-implement all of the nitty-gritty underneath. So that kind of fundamental infrastructure part, it's almost entirely sure that we're going to be able to reuse it as is for JMAP. How much of an overlap there will be in that, um, well, whether there will be a large enough overlap between EWS/Graph and JMAP to be able to kind of generalize that interface layer that Elena was mentioning to also include JMAP. That still remains to be seen. We would definitely like to do that and to end up with something we can push as the one kind of protocol interface and massively essentially simplify going forwards or code architecture around email protocols by having kind of a general backend and only specializing the actual implementation of protocols. That's if the more we can push in that direction, the better. But we'll have to figure out exactly what shape that takes as we move forward.
I love the forward thinking like nature of designing
Mhm.
this architecture so that, when you do get to addressing JMAP, it is in as ideal a situation as possible. So that's great.
And I guess one thing I want to add is we've got kind of like the perfect situation for figuring out if that's going to work ahead of time because, EWS to graph is kind of is a small hop. I mean, it's a big hop, but it's, EWS and graph are, very similar in, kind of like their model of how, mailboxes look and how messages look. And then, so we have this kind of perfect test case. So can we just extend it a little bit, to get graph? And what do we have to generalize in order to get this one protocol that's, one step away? And then once we figure out that level of generalization, then maybe we can figure out how we can improve the architecture to get to this next protocol that's two steps away, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like we're very, I don't know if I want to call it lucky, but it's neat.
It's nice not to have to make the huge jump first.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely good to have that kind of to be able to approach that in an incremental way where, yeah, we can test if we're not, if we're not going somewhere completely crazy, and if we're not, then we can see if, there's a bit more room under the blanket.
You've already had to like make that huge jump first, right? From the existing IMAP code to EWS and say, how can I avoid this pain in the future as much as possible?
Yeah, I mean, although the approach in this case, if you compare IMAP to AWS, is a bit different because we didn't necessarily want to. So the one of the issue that we had with the current code is there's a lot of specification of the code and the generic interfaces that is not necessarily necessary. and so we didn't necessarily want to spend too much time trying to iterate on something that was designed in a way that didn't make that like that was kind of adverse to this kind of generalization changes. Uh, and so the hope is that with instead of that, with our current approach, we can kind of start building something new in a way because the entire Rust-based approach is new, and the separation that it forces us to take is also new. And uh, and take that approach and incrementally, as Elena said, go towards somewhere where hopefully at some point we might even be able to migrate our IMAP support to something like that. That's the hope, but obviously we're very far from there.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. I just want to finish up with speaking of things that users are looking forward to. What are some of the challenges with integrating the Exchange calendar and address book? And when can we start to see some development in these areas?
Um, I guess I can start there. So I think the first one that I know of that we're going to hit is we talked about kind of in this kind of separation architecture that we made for mail. I think identifying those boundaries for calendar and address book, I think that's the biggest kind of upfront challenge that we have because we want to make, again, we want to plan for the future and, make it possible. And we know graph is going to come, right? Like we don't have a choice there. That's coming. And so we want to create those same kind of boundaries and make those same kind of architectural decisions that allowed us that is allowing this kind of extensible design for EWS. We want to do the same thing for calendar and address book. The good news with EWS is that the protocol is all one unified protocol for address book, for mail, for calendar, for everything. Um, so um, right, so we have a lot of like the fundamental building blocks and pieces in place. The question is, how do we integrate it with nice boundaries so that, it's extensible in the same way that the mail interface is extensible. Did you have anything to add to that, Brendan?
Um, no, not really. I mean, as you said, the one nice thing with calendar and address book is the way um, EWS is kind of consistent with itself. So essentially, creating a calendar event, for example, looks very similar in terms of API calls to creating a message, which we already do in Thunderbirds. And so we might still need to do some adjustments here and there to because maybe some of our interface layer is a bit too mail specific, but we're not starting from scratch. We already have support for most of those operations. We just need to adapt them where they need to be adapted, and also figure out the right separation between the protocol specific stuff and the more generic stuff. Figuring out also how that plugs into calendar and address book because they're in terms of like purely code, they're very separate code bases um, from email just because at least calendar used to be an add-on that was just
Mhm.
essentially pulled into Thunderbird, and so the the code architecture there is fairly fairly different, obviously. So figuring out all that adaptation is going to be the main challenge. But on the other hand, we have a bit. On the other hand, it's not an entirely new feature to support. It is on paper, but in terms of the code that's already there, that should mostly work, at least um, for those features, we'll be able to go much faster than if we had to implement it from scratch.
Very cool. Very cool. So in terms of, just out of curiosity, in terms of like what you all are working on now, in like prioritization, is it kind of graph and then calendar and then address book? Is that
Yeah, but the reasons for that are so the other thing that's happening right now is the front end team is doing a lot of work on calendar. And
hmm
so we decided to go ahead and prioritize. Originally, we were going to work calendar and address book ahead of graph, but
Mhm.
given that the front end is being worked on calendar right now, if we started working with the back end as well. We just didn't want to have those kind of like conflicts in place.
Right.
So that's why we decided to go ahead and start working on graph, prioritize graph ahead of that, and
Mhm.
then come back and do calendar. So ultimately, we're going to be, I think, kind of interleaving development on all of those things to try to get where we need to get. But that's why we're kind of holding off for a second on just going full bore into calendar and address book.
Gotcha. Very cool.
Another reason why we're kind of shifting our gears and prioritizing graph before calendar slash address book, or at least interleaving it when we can, is because as a number of our users have noted, AWS on Microsoft 365 will be turned off in a year from now, roughly.
Mhm.
Um, which means that we don't really have a choice about when we'll need to start introducing at least some kind of feature parity with what we have for AWS, but with Graph. And obviously, that's a deadline we don't want to miss because obviously we don't want to, make a lot of noise announcing that Exchange is available on Thunderbird only for that support to stop working for most users after a year.
Yeah.
That's another of the reasons why we had to kind of move things around and start working on Graph a bit earlier than we expected.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I think the internet's
That's,
going to be happy to hear that. Um, well, I think that was all the questions we had.
I think
Thank you
so.
both so much for all of your hard work for rolling out this big thing that lots of people were looking forward to, and for being here today to kind of talk about it and ask or answer questions about, what's supported and what's not and what's coming next, and kind of give us a little bit of a behind the scenes on some of the challenges that might not be obvious to other people. So thank you both
Yeah,
very much.
Yeah. Thank you guys for
Um,
hosting.
of
yeah, this is a
course.
great way to end the year of community office hours.
I know. It's just a nice positive note. And I think that all of you involved on the desktop team should be really proud. And it's also just exciting to see how enthusiastic you all are about this. Like Eleanor, when you were explaining the layer in between, I'm like, that's really cool. I am not an inherently technical person. And I'm like, okay, I get that analogy. So just having people who are deeply interested in solving problems that make life better for our users, it's really awesome.
It is. Yeah. Well, okay. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and we'll be back next year with a cool new topic. So, happy holidays, everybody. And we'll
And
say
see
bye
you
for
in
now.
2026.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.